Welcome to the Galloway Show, no budget television coming to you from inside my own house. No budget, just me, my wife, my pal in Manchester on the sound, and my cat, which had a walk-on part last week. I'm sorry if that offended you. I understand that the Champions League semi-final between Real Madrid and Manchester City has turned terribly exciting in the last couple of minutes. So if you want to watch this later on catch up, I will understand. If I could, I'd be downstairs watching the game myself. Almost as big a crowd at the Bernabeu as there was at the investiture, the swearing in of the new Pope, Juan Guaido I, who's already been recognized by over 110 countries around the world. The international community has rallied to Pope Juan Guaido following the unfortunate accident between the late Pope Francis and a Rome omnibus. I'm only joking, of course, but only half joking, because the statement yesterday issued by His Holiness Pope Francis, God preserve him, that NATO had caused the war in Ukraine by barking at Russia's door. Well, barking is the least that you could say they were doing. Salivating, teeth sharp, tooth and claw. They've been trying to cause problems for Russia now for many years. In Ukraine for at least 8 years, probably 18 years. And of course, around the neighborhood of Russia, the enemy never sleeps. Anything to weaken Russia, or as Nancy Pelosi put it today, decimate Russia. You know what decimate means, right? It means break it into 10 pieces. And that's probably about the size of it. It's been a covert goal, not so covert inside the Beltway of the United States, all of this time since the fall of the Soviet Union, to break up Russia in the hope that a Russian government could never be independent enough to strike a course on foreign policy independent of the empire. They have completely failed to do that. The rise of Putin, not my man, originally their man, has ensured that Russia has gotten up off the floor, dusted itself down, sobered up, captured some at least of the thieves who stole Russia's wealth on Boris Yeltsin's watch, and dramatically enhanced the strength and prestige and prosperity of the Russian people. So the decimation has had to wait. But they saw that the cat's paw that would be most effective, the spear of the javelin, which apparently Ukrainians are being encouraged to call their newborn children, the point of the javelin has, for this last 8 years, been the Ukraine. And the Pope was entirely correct to say so. There are reports that his PayPal account has been closed down, that he's now being shadow banned on Twitter, and that he is quite possibly a Russian bot or even a Kremlin agent. Maybe he'll get a stamp on his Twitter handle, as I have unfairly been given on mine. More about that later. But the situation in Ukraine and Russia will, of course, take up much of what I have to say tonight because of the sheer gravity of the situation. But first, I'd like to reflect on the fact that on this day in 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected for the first time as the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Britain's first woman Prime Minister, and if you look at it objectively, the most significant Prime Minister since the Second World War, more significant even than Clement Attlee, the post-war Labour Prime Minister, because his reforms haven't lasted. But Margaret Thatcher's changes to Britain didn't just last throughout her 10 years in power, they've lasted unbroken until now. 1979 until 2022 is a very long time for one person's ideas to rule. But that is what has happened in Britain. The deindustrialization of Britain, the smashing of the labor unions, the atomization of the society into deserving and undeserving, the misreading of scripture. Mrs. Thatcher actually had the gall to tell a gathering of Scottish churchmen at their General Assembly, an annual assembly on the Mound, a sermon on the Mound, you might call it, that the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan was not that the Good Samaritan was good, but that he was rich enough to be able to afford to pause and not pass on the other side of the road when he came upon a broken and injured man. Mrs. Thatcher infamously said on the very same occasion, in fact, that there is no such thing as society, only individuals. Well, that's the difference between Margaret Thatcher and me. As a former Kremlin agent, the former Labour leader, now Lord Kinnock, and a scourge of anything called socialism, once put it, no honouring of other people's mother and father, no cherishing of other people's children, no us and always, just me and now, me and now. Mrs. Thatcher personified the me and now philosophy. Loads of money, Maggie, brought us up to worship money, and we've never turned back. Her policies of privatization, of zero growth in labor union activity and the ability of labor unions to function actively has continued to dominate the British economy. The British economy, deindustrialized, was encouraged by Mrs. Thatcher to substitute financial services as the substitute for the once proud Made in Britain mark, which made motor cars and railway engines and trucks and bikes and hovercrafts and supersonic airliners, Concords, and all the other things that were once the pride of British industrial achievement, all now gone to their grave. If not entirely to their grave, then now in German ownership. And Germany is another subject I now want to turn to. Mrs. Thatcher only ever spoke to me once. I was in the House of Commons with her for a comparatively short period of time before she went on to the House of Lords, and she always swept by me with a kind of haughty disdain. But she came up to me, to my astonishment, only once in the library corridor of the House of Commons, where I had some of my most spectacular altercations, most notably with Tony Blair just before the Iraq War. But on this occasion, she wanted to tell me that she had agreed with everything I had said during the Yugoslav war about the danger of Helmut Kohl, as it was then, premature recognition of the independence of Slovenia, the separatist breakaway from the former Yugoslav Republic. I had made the case that Helmut Kohl and Germany were a potential danger to the rest of Europe, and that they hadn't gone away, and that a reunified Germany was a clear and present danger to the rest of the continent. And a reunified Germany would eventually, when the wartime generation died out, I had argued, would be prey to revanchist German nationalism, which was very soon on display in their bombers over Belgrade. I'm not making that up. After the Second World War, there were bombers again over Belgrade with the German symbol on them. I argued that the dangers of rearmament, revanchism, and the rebirth of German nationalism were a clear and present danger. And she said in that inimitable voice of hers, "I agreed with everything you said about Germany." Unfortunately, as in many cases, agreeing after the fact is too late. Agreeing when you've got no power to change it is too late. And agreeing in private in the corridors of the House of Commons rather than in public on television is too late and too little. And now we are seeing it again. The German right is a clear and present danger to German democracy, or soon will be, because the ultra-nationalist policy of the German government in relation to Ukraine has brought down the house on top of the German economy, just at a time when the country has never been more full with refugees, ready-made scapegoats for the economic disaster that is slowly, but not so slowly, and definitely surely working its way down the pipelines, the now closed pipelines of the Nord Stream 2 and the other pipelines that used to supply the German economy with Russian gas. The refusal of Germany to stand up to the United States pressure, as Angela Merkel, a far greater statesperson than little soldier Schulz, the failure to stand up to the bullying of the United States has given way to a new ravenous hunger and rhetoric of hatred against Russia from Germany. And they want to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, but you would not put money on Germany being the first European country into an all-out war between NATO and Russia. You may think that that is alarmist, but I don't. It's quite clear that the British government, in particular, is egging the Ukrainians on to a degree greater than any other country. But that's because we are very far away from the scene of the action. Although the Russians are becoming so angry at the provocations from London that on their media it's very easy to find reckless and blood-curdling rhetoric about destroying Britain as a punishment for our statements by ministers, not officials, not unnamed, not behind the scenes, not unquoted, but actual government ministers encouraging the Ukrainians to attack Russian territory and the dispatching of just about every high-tech, brand new weapon that we could have had in the quartermaster's stores. Britain is doing as it sometimes does in recent years, doing all the shouting, but it would be Germany and Poland in particular that would be doing all the fighting. And the very real danger of the collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces in the eastern part of the country, east of the river Dnieper, will bring about a political crisis because that will leave the regime in Kiev with only the least fertile and the least industrially productive parts of the country and will leave them entirely landlocked, a burden forever on the European Union and on NATO, both of which presumably would quickly admit, the organizations would quickly admit Ukraine into membership. And then we would have a Mexican standoff between a Russified Eastern Ukraine and a NATO EU Western Ukraine. And the war would go on. It would be very much harder for the Ukrainians to fight it alone with the proxy support of all these other NATO countries. And so the pressure for the NATO countries to actually enter the country, supposedly in a peacekeeping role, would be very considerable indeed. And that is already beginning to happen. As I've explained to you before, there are many of Ukraine's neighbors, a country which has only existed in its current form since 1954, when the Crimea was given by Nikita Khrushchev to the Ukrainian government, taking sixpence out of one pocket and putting it into another pocket, cost the Soviet Union nothing, of course. They never dreamt that the two countries would one day be separate nation states. But 1954 is not that long ago, not least because it's the year that I was born, and I'm not ready for the knacker's yard yet. But between 1954 and 1945, and between 1945 and 1918, and in the century before that, all of Ukraine's neighbors actually owned very substantial parts of what is now Ukraine. And the most notable of those, though there are others, Romania, Hungary, are two that I don't have time to dwell upon. But the Polish claim to significant parts, including the treasure city of Lvov, is very clear and historic. Once upon a time, these parts of Ukraine were Polish-speaking people, and the territory was owned and sovereignty possessed by Poland. So the chances of Poland entering the western part of the country are very significant indeed. And Germany, in its current mood, would be unlikely to want to stay out of the frame. So, Mrs. Thatcher, I don't remember you with any fondness, but I do recall that on that one issue, that one evening in the House of Commons, as you leant over me with your famous handbag swinging on your arm, at least you were right once in your life about the dangers of Germany to the peace and security and stability of Europe. The United States has gone completely berserk. America first was President Trump's slogan. He didn't live up to it all that well, but he lived up to it a lot better than Joe Biden, who doesn't even use the words. How could he? He's just announced that he wants to give $33 billion in military aid to Ukraine. He's already given $3 billion, much of which has either been destroyed on its way in, destroyed in the arms depots once it got there, destroyed on the battlefield where Russia is now sweeping all before it in the eastern part of the country, what we'll call loosely the Donbass, or sold already on the dark web to terrorists and criminals who will be robbing banks and bringing down airliners, God forbid, in the years to come with all that weaponry that Joe Biden has already shipped. But he wants to ship 10 times more. This at a time when the people in Flint, Michigan, still do not have clean drinking water. This at a time when America's crumbling infrastructure is playing an increasingly important role in their failure to recover industrially and in their manufacturing sector in the post-COVID period. The infrastructure of the United States in many places resembles, if not a third world country, then many of the parts of Eastern Europe, of the former Soviet territories. The students in America are buckling under unrepayable student loan financing, which Joe Biden cannot or will not rub out. He will not cancel the student debt. Can't afford it, but he can afford $33 billion in weapons to fight against the Russians. So it's only a matter of time, unless the American people are irredeemably stupid, before the political price begins to be paid by Joe Biden and the Democrats in the midterm elections in November for starters, and in the next presidential election, which will then just be 2 years off for sure, because you surely cannot have this waste and profligacy of America's declining wealth and not pay a political price for it. The primaries were this week in the United States. The Trump candidate for the Republican nomination in the crucial state of Ohio won very comfortably indeed. And he'll win that state very comfortably indeed. Donald Trump beat Joe Biden even in the rigged election of 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. He won it very comfortably by 8 percentage points. That'll be a hold because it's already a Republican seat. The retiring senator is a Republican, but the Republicans need only one single Senate seat to take control of the Senate. And anyone who'd bet against them doing that would be a very foolhardy individual indeed. As a matter of fact, I think the Republicans will have sweeping gains in the Senate and sweeping gains in the House of Representatives. And then a beleaguered Joe Biden, increasingly unable to find his way to the bathroom in time, will be beleaguered and besieged in the White House. There will be trials. There will be impeachments. Hunter Biden's laptop will be up there for everyone to see, X-rated as it is. And the Trumpites will undoubtedly be back, and their slogan will again be America first. Why are we wasting all of our treasure and risking even our blood for faraway conflicts in places of which we, especially in the United States, don't just know little, but know absolutely nothing at all? I have no time for the Democrats or the Republicans any more than I do for the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. And there are elections tomorrow in Britain for the local councils. Let me spend a minute or two on those. Whatever you do in England, do not vote for the Conservatives or for the Labour Party. These two parties, this duopoly, these two cheeks of the same arse, can deliver nothing to you. Nothing. They have delivered nothing. They are Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and they are both co-responsible for the state that we are in. If you're in Wales, if you're in Scotland, and you, like me, want to keep the country together, then it is important to vote for the candidate best placed to defeat the separatists, to ensure that they cannot use these local election results as a kind of booster for a relaunch of their never-ending campaign to break up Britain. I don't want to break up Britain. It was important to get Britain's independence back from the European Union. It is important to keep Britain together. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because if a united Britain outside of the EU continues to be run, to be governed by such low-class individuals, I mean, the House of Commons was never, a monastery. It was never a paragon of virtue. But when you've got members of Parliament resigning because they've been caught looking at pornography on their telephone, sitting in the chamber of the House of Commons, as has just happened in the last week or so, when you've got members of Parliament, as happened in Wakefield, where there's now a new parliamentary by-election waiting to happen, who's been convicted of serious sexual offenses against underage boys, when you've got sin after sin, vice after vice, crime after crime, even on a personal level, in terms of personal conduct and behavior, then what can you expect in terms of policy? to emerge from such an auditorium. People often say to me, you need to get back in Parliament. I have to tell you quite honestly, not only that I don't think that's going to happen, but that I don't know if I could bear it. I really don't know if I could bear to be back in that company again that I spent almost 30 years of my life in. It's all gone so small. It's all gone downhill so far. But there are candidates standing that are worthy of support in the English local elections. Tomorrow, I was electioneering in Batley, where you'll recall last year I got 22% of the vote in the parliamentary by-election there. Pretty splendid result in all the circumstances. And we're standing and have a good chance of taking seats, not just in Batley, but also in Birmingham and also in Merseyside, in the Liverpool area. We have outstanding candidates. If there's a Workers' Party candidate on your ballot paper, I very much hope that you will lend them your support. And knowing the candidates as I do, I hope you'll do that. In Camden Town in London, we have 3 candidates standing of the very highest caliber against opponents who, well, let me just say, are not of the very highest caliber. I'll go no further than that. So in Camden, in Batley, in Birmingham, in Merseyside, we have candidates that are well worthy of support. And there will be other independents that are worth supporting too. There'll be other candidates standing under various socialist banners. And they are, of course, worth supporting. But if you don't have any such candidates, please either stay at home or, even better, go to the ballot box and spoil your ballot paper. None of the above. Put a big scratch through all of their names. Of course, electoral politics is not the be-all and end-all for us, particularly in wartime. I can't remember when I had time to concentrate on local or national issues. It's one damn thing after another on the international scene. This show is doing very well. Between 55 and 75,000 people are now watching it every week, despite the lack of bells and whistles and the obvious lack of budget that it involves. So this is free, but the mother of all talk shows goes from strength to strength. 1.7 million people watched the show before last. We don't know the figures for this show. They'll be down a bit. The Pakistan crisis has abated a bit, and that drew in a lot of new viewers. But 1.7 million watching a terrifically low budget television show over 3 hours. In all or in part, 1.7 million. Just think about that. If you want to contrast it with something, Piers Morgan, backed by Rupert Murdoch, with a marketing and advertising budget of many, many millions of pounds, backed by Rupert Murdoch's newspapers, endlessly cross-promoted across Murdoch's media empire, Piers Corbyn's last show, Piers Morgan, I mustn't get the two mixed up, Piers Morgan's last show attracted 67,000 people. And he was exponentially ahead of the rest of his colleagues on the network. It's called Talk TV or something. I don't recommend it. There were some shows on Talk TV that had fewer than 5,000 people watching. And yet the mother of all talk shows was able to get 1.7 million the week before last, and regularly now hits 1 million viewers every single week. We desperately need a sponsor for the show if we're going to keep it going. It's valued by many, many people around the world. It's the biggest show of its kind in the English-speaking world. But until I get that sponsor, and I am negotiating hard for that sponsor. It's the best value anyone advertising on television could ever dream of, really, for a 3-hour show with your logo behind us, your name on our ticker tape, me giving you a shout out. It's a bargain. But until I have landed that bargain, then the viewers will have to support the show. We've already had to close the midweek extra. That's why the Galloway Show is here filling in the gaps. And we've now had to discontinue our podcast. We simply can't afford to support these two things because we have to keep the global open university of the airwaves alive. So here's where I'm asking you to give, not generously. I don't want you to give generously. Of course, I take my hat off to those who have given generously because they can or will give generously because they want to. I take my hat off to them. I'm deeply grateful to you, but I'm not asking you to give generously. I'm asking you to give £1 or $1 a week for a 3-hour television show with no other visible or invisible means of support. £1, $1. Give it now on the website, on the donation page, and why don't you click the recurrent button so that your £1 will be automatically paid every single week. That'll keep the show going if you're prepared to do that. And then as soon as I get a sponsor, you'll be the first to know, and I'll be able to stop asking you to donate. I've no idea how Real Madrid did. Well, there's a very handsome donation. Joanne Nayeri, €10. Thank you very much indeed. Joanne says, Babushka Z became a symbolic figure against the Ukrainian regime after refusing food when a Ukrainian soldier stepped on her Soviet flag, saying that her parents died for that flag. Indeed, I'm very happy to know that she's alive and well, and I'll be talking about her on Sunday at noon in the Bolivar Hall in Grafton Way in Fitzrovia in London, where I shall be addressing what I think will be a magnificent occasion, marking the Victory Day in the Second World War, to which I was, in fact, about to turn. The younger amongst you can be forgiven for not fully grasping the importance of that victory, the importance of the defeat of fascism in the rubble of Berlin at the hands of the Red Army, which was the vanguard, the decisive role, which killed 8 out of every 10 German soldiers killed in the war. The Red Army of the then Soviet Union liberated the death camps, liberated Berlin, destroyed Nazi power in the Nazi German capital. And that must never be forgotten. But here's the thing that is, I think, almost entirely forgotten now in Western countries. We only achieved that victory because we were a united front of allies, the United States of America, which made such sacrifice in 1944 on the beaches at Normandy, on D-Day, and made such enormous sacrifice in the Pacific War against Hitler's fascist Japanese ally. The Great Britain that I belong to, which stood for a time alone against the Hitlerites, when everyone else had folded like a cheap tent, lasting hours or days at most, in their long and much vaunted defensive plans and Maginot Lines and all the imaginary paraphernalia of war. They folded like a cheap deck chair. And Britain's role of course, didn't end there. My own grandfathers fought at El Alamein. They fought in Monte Cassino. They were haunted by Monte Cassino in particular for the rest of their lives. Britain went on contributing in the Far East as well as in the European theatre. And if we had not stood alone when the Americans were watching the war on newsreel, then there wouldn't have been a Second World War to win. Hitler would have triumphed over all of Europe, and some arrangement between the United States and Nazi Germany, in my opinion, would undoubtedly have been reached. But that unity of Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, joined, of course, by the then united Chinese forces, Chinese nationalist and Chinese communist forces, of which the latter were by far the most militarily significant. That united front lost. I mean, the Soviet Union lost 27 million people. The Chinese lost 20 million people. Lost phenomenal numbers of men, women, and children, materiel and infrastructure. But we triumphed over fascism, and we ground the swastika into dust in the rubble of Berlin. And yet that wartime alliance might as well now have been not 9 years before I was born, but 5 centuries ago, because we're now supposed to love the Germans, love the Japanese. In fact, the Japanese are being encouraged into an alliance with the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand against China. All we need now is the Italian Navy to steam up, and we can call them, I don't know, the Axis all over again. The German Navy was in joint exercises with the Japanese Navy just last week in maneuvers designed to put pressure on China. When Germany and Japan killed 20 million people in China in the Second World War. That's how bitter and twisted everything has become. Britain is fighting a very vicious fight against Russia. I saw in the Gazetted today an Irish broadcaster, nothing to do with Britain at all, an Irish broadcaster. As a matter of fact, I don't think he was even a broadcaster, although I interviewed him a couple of times on our now dead Sputnik show. Brian MacDonald, Irish, has been sanctioned by Britain. What does Brian MacDonald have to do with you, Liz Truss or Boris Johnson? How do you imagine? Unless Ireland isn't independent after all, what good is a British sanction on an Irish citizen? They are forever dreaming up new and fiendish ways to put pressure on social media companies, on platforms, on individuals, and on companies to make sure that the other side of the argument about Ukraine does not reach the ears of many, the eyes of many. I don't know when they'll come for me. I now have no paid work. I may have to move abroad in order to work because there ain't no television company in Britain going to give me a job. That is for sure. Of course, if that happens, you'll still be seeing me, you'll still be hearing me. This is 2022 after all. You can't shut the internet. You can make it harder for people to find others. But where there's a will, there's a way. and I'm always looking for a way. Because as long as God gives me breath, I will not stop talking and fighting for the things I believe in. Pittsburgh Dude gave $10. Thank you, Dude. Michael Hudson's comments to you on Africa turning into Ukraine were alarming. You should talk to Harmela Aregawi about Ethiopia and the controlled narrative of corporate media. I think you'll love her. Well, I promise to do that. Thank you very much, Pittsburgh Dude. And I'm sorry if any other donations came up there when I wasn't looking at the screen. Full-time Real Madrid, 3, Manchester City, 1. My goodness, Real Madrid have defeated Manchester City by 6 goals to 5. So it's Liverpool versus Real Madrid in the Champions League final in Paris on the 28th of May. That is quite a comeback. My condolences to Manchester City supporters. They must have thought that they had that game won. They fought a magnificent campaign. Carol Hope gives £5 super sticker. Carol, thank you so much. That is really very kind of you. You don't have to give now for the rest of the month. I'm really only seeking one from everybody, but people like Beer and Flies who give $49.99, I kiss you, because that's worth 49.99 people who didn't give or won't give or can't give, though I find it difficult to believe that people are watching me every week for 3 hours and they don't think I'm worth donating £1 to, especially as it isn't going to me. I'm asking for this money to keep the show going, to pay the people that need paid, to pay the studio, to pay for the cameras and the lights and the sound and all of the things that are necessary to run a global show with a reach of more than 1 million every single week. I'm not asking you to give me money. I may have to go abroad in order to get money for me. Let's see. Anna Danilovic says, on this day in 1980, a great partisan leader, one of the founders of non-aligned movement, the president of Yugoslavia, died. Anna, I take my hat off to the great Marshal Tito, one of my heroes, one of the greatest men of the 20th century, who led the partisans who liberated themselves from Nazi rule, who tied down several Nazi divisions throughout the war with their ceaseless guerrilla campaign and their fight against the fascist collaborators inside Yugoslavia, which they had to conduct at the very same time. Tito, I salute you and your memory. Thanks, Anna, for reminding me. Paul McCord says £5 donation. Thank you, Paul. Much obliged to you, my friend. Vote for Chris Hawes in Ford and Paul McCord in Soodle in Sefton in Merseyside, standing for the Workers' Party of Britain. That's Chris Hawes in Ford and also the other Sefton ward. Please give us your support. Any other messages, or are we nearly done? Sean Bebbington donates £6. Thank you, Sean. God bless you. Local elections, May 2022. If there's no Workers' Party of Britain candidate, spoil your ballot. Give them a kick in the ballots. You may say that. I couldn't possibly comment. De Jazeera gave $10. I'm much obliged to you, really. Mr. Galloway, any comment on the soon-to-be Ministry of Truth in the US? Well, the head of the new Ministry of Truth in the US vouched for the veracity of the Steele dossier into Donald Trump and Russiagate, now utterly discredited, lying in shreds, in ruins. But the person who vouched for it is now to be in charge of a panel, a board, no less, which will combat disinformation. We know what this is all about. These countries, like Britain, like the United States, and many others, are literally in front of your eyes abandoning the very things that they claimed for 100 years were their shtick, their leitmotif, the thing that they had that nobody else had, that the Iron Curtain, behind the Iron Curtain, none of them had the right to speak. None of them had the right to publish freely. The roles are completely reversed now. We, in our countries, that once wore this label of free speech, free assembly, demonstrate, protest, meaningfully vote, change the government, change the direction of things in your country, all of that is being abandoned by one device or another, either by the homogeneity of the political parties, and we've in Britain got a one-party parliament. They knock hell out of each other over who had a bottle of stout and who only had light ale at a party, which was really just a curry or a quiz night in the workplace during the lockdown. They knock hell out of each other over that. That's all synthetic fire and fury, wind and piss is what it is. On the big things, on war, and on how we run our economy and who should pay for the crisis, these two parties are one, absolutely welded together. And free speech is being freely abandoned right in front of us. You're not allowed to hear the other fellow's point of view. Now that is bad, not just if you're claiming to be liberal and democratic. It's bad for an entirely pragmatic reason. That if you don't know the other side of the story, how can you know that your side of the story is right? It's not rocket science. If you're following a line, a policy, but you don't know the other side of the story, how can you know that your policy and your line is right? Oh, wow, 50 Australian dollars from Jan Schoenfeld, Canadian, I beg your pardon, Canadian dollars, 50 Canadian dollars from Jan Schoenfeld. Thank you very much indeed. And Jan says, I get 900 euros pension from France, but free speech comes at a price. Thank you, George. On est ne tous les deux en 1954. Jan was born in that very great year also. I wish I could afford to retire, Jan, but it looks like it's going to be some time yet. Mark Parry, £10. Thank you, Mark. Much obliged to you, my friend. Resistance is a birthright. Keep the good fight, people. It's true, you know, that's what we are now, the resistance. We are the underground. We are the Samisdat. We are the people that will be publishing illegal texts, giving illegal broadcasts. And if we get caught, we'll be thrown into a prison in the land of the free, the home of the brave, and in the land of the mother of all parliaments. You really couldn't make it up. Michael Kelleher says, I think, George, for the next few days, that is in it, next Monday, Russia's victory day of their great patriotic war remembrance on the 9th of May. The dissolution of the Soviet Union was a sad day. Sad indeed for the peoples of the Soviet Union and sad for the world because it led to a unipolar era, mercifully brief, now well and truly at an end, when the United States was the sole remaining superpower and could roam around like a bull in a china shop, smashing everything underfoot. Brian Holden says, anyone who loves freedom owes such a debt to the Red Army that it can never be repaid. Who said that? Brian knows. Ernest Hemingway said that. I must say, I've sat in the bar, the Bodeguita, and eaten in the restaurant, the Floridita, that Ernest Hemingway used to drink and eat in Havana, Cuba. How I miss it. How I wish I was there. Paddy McIntyre says, George, good evening. Debate on the scandal of Partygate. It appears Starmer and Entourage are also guilty. Want this to go away. Elections on the way. What are your thoughts? Laughable scoundrels they all are. Very well put, Paddy. Laughable scoundrels. For those watching from overseas, Labour laboured the point that Boris Johnson had sat down and eaten a slice of birthday cake on his birthday in the cabinet room at number 10 Downing Street with the colleagues that he would otherwise have been working with in the same office. Not making it up. Labour made a national scandal, ably abetted by the Remainer media and the BBC over Partygate. And now it turns out that Labour and its leader and deputy leader have been caught having done exactly the same thing, except theirs was a curry rather than a birthday cake. Laughable scoundrels, Paddy. You got it bang on. Mush McKenna says two nuclear powers should never engage in warfare against one another. That's what nukes were supposed to ensure. But of course, a monopolar world with the Nazis of the USA in charge ensues atrocity. Well, we are in a very real danger of a wider European war, which could very easily, because if one side is losing that European war, what are they going to do? Accept defeat? Surrender? I'm afraid not. They're far more likely to escalate that conflict into a nuclear exchange. First, of battlefield nuclear weapons, then of intermediate nuclear weapons, and ultimately of intercontinental ballistic missiles, which would mean the end of the entire world and every living thing in it. Mr. Loverman, $9.99. I love you, Mr. Loverman. My favorite show. I never miss an episode. Thanks. Somebody wrote earlier, why am I quieter on the Galloway Show than I am on the mother of all talk shows? Well, first of all, I'm in my own house and my children are sleeping, and I don't want to excite my cat. Secondly, the point about this format was that it would be more intimate, that it would be more, I don't know, fireside chat. Let me know if you think I've got the balance right on that. I can always turn it up, or I can turn it down, light and shade. Lillian Syra Deville. Good evening, George. I've given £90 so far. I shall be donating £5 per week. I've joined your Patreon channel. Lillian, I can't thank you enough. I'm repairing to my Patreon channel in just a few minutes' time. For those that wish to continue the discussion, I get my gum out and drink my tea, sometimes take my jacket off for another half hour or so. There's the details, patreon.com/George Galloway. I'm trying to build an independent media so that I'm independent even of YouTube. Imagine, this is only on YouTube. And they've been good with me, but they haven't been good with other people. And the day might come when they're no longer good with me. The day might come when they banish me. Twitter might do the same, not least because I'm taking them to court, Mr. Musk, because of this fake appellation that you or your company stamped on my name. People like me could disappear overnight from these channels, and many have, like Pepe Escobar, like Scott Ritter. Many have already. And so you have to be able to find me somewhere. I have a meeting tomorrow by Zoom. I'm going to start a Substack for my writing. I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. And I'm on Telegram. Please follow me there. Telegram, that's t.me/George Galloway. That'll be my last redoubt, actually. It's the one place I think I can say I'll never be banned from. I'm really strong on TikTok now. I don't know if you follow TikTok. I always thought it was for much younger people than me. I never looked at it, but I've got some very young and clever people around me, and they have got me on TikTok. My friend Yaz in Leeds, Bradford, my granddaughter Lola, several people have been helping me with it. And if you go to #George Galloway on TikTok, you will find in 3 months 25 million hits. Now that's what you call an audience. And apparently you can get into debates with people on TikTok, and there are various other, if you like, innovations on that platform. So I'm going to pay more attention to that over the next period. Sorry, I just missed that one. If it could be put up again. Indigo Carmine. Japan is and has been used as a geopolitical tool for the US since World War II. They bombed us, then they used what was left. Undoubtedly true. They'll use Japan to fight to the last Japanese against China. And the reason they're unhinged in this frenzy against Russia is because they know that the ever closer relationship between Russia and China makes both of them unbeatable. Unbeatable economically and unbeatable militarily. And therefore, the days of US hegemony are gone. So they simply must weaken, break up Russia, China too, if they can. Hong Kong might be a nice place for me and Gayatri to go and live. We like the food, certainly. Michael Kelleher again. I'm from Ireland, George. Big debate happening here about joining NATO. I don't want that. The Warsaw Pact in 1991 stood down. Why didn't the NATO stand down as well? Well, Michael, you don't have to work hard to persuade me of that. Irish neutrality had been becoming a bit dog-eared over the last 20 years in any case. Dog-eared because of the use of Shannon Airport as a staging point for hundreds of thousands of troops from the empire stopping off in Ireland in violation of Ireland's constitution. The use of Ireland and Shannon for the rendition of people on their way to black prisons to be literally tortured, in many cases, tortured to death. It's not a very good look for Ireland, but it was happening. And now we've got the situation where they are openly talking about joining NATO. I hope they have a referendum on it. If they do, I'll be over there joining in the campaign, being half an Irishman myself. My dude, Leaky Tiki, gives $10. Thank you. Seldom get to watch your show live. Just doing what I can to keep your show going. All my best. Thank you very kindly for that. Couple of minutes more. Will McGuigan, Moats and the Galloway Show, best value in hard times. Thank you, Will. Much obliged to you. If that's it, I'll bid you a good night, except for those who are going to follow me over onto the Patreon channel. And if you think I'm relaxed here on the Galloway Show, you should see me on the Patreon. Thanks for watching.